The farmhouse on the edge of Briar Hollow had been empty for years. Locals said the last owners left in a hurry, leaving dishes in the sink and curtains drawn against the world. No one had stepped through its rotting porch since. No one except the children who dared each other to knock on its peeling blue door. But that night, under a bruised sky and the hiss of autumn rain, the sheriff's K-9 sat on that very doorstep and did something no one had ever seen him do before. He pressed his muzzle against the wood, whined deep in his throat, and began to weep. If you find stories like this gripping, stay with us. Your quiet tension here helps keep these stories alive. The radio crackled in the cab of Sheriff Dalton Ward's truck as he slowed onto the muddy shoulder. "Dalton, you there?" Came a voice. Deputy Lila Grant, young, sharp, still carrying that city edge even after 3 years in Briar Hollow. "I'm here," Dalton muttered, shifting the mic. "Go ahead." "Got a call from Miss Branson. Said she saw your dog out by the Hollow place again. Crying. Not barking, crying. Sounded spooked." Dalton glanced at the German shepherd in the back seat. Riker, ears pinned back, restless paws shifting. He'd been uneasy all day, whining at doors, snapping at shadows. But now, Riker was staring out the window, muscles taut, as if he knew the destination before Dalton even touched the gas. The Hollow place. Dalton parked under the dripping canopy of sycamores. The house rose in front of him like something left behind from a forgotten century. 2 stories of sagging wood, shutters hanging like broken arms, and a porch that bowed under the weight of rain. Riker leapt down before Dalton opened the door. He bounded to the house and planted himself at the entrance, nose pressed to the doorframe, his whole body trembling. He released a sound Dalton had never heard from him before, a long, keening whimper that sank into the marrow. Dalton's jaw tightened. "Easy, boy." The dog pawed once at the wood, then sat, ears back, and cried. Lila's cruiser pulled up, tires crunching gravel. She stepped out, rain slicker catching the dim glow of Dalton's headlights. What the hell is wrong with him? "Wish I knew," Dalton said. His boots squelched in the mud as he joined her at the porch. The air smelled of wet earth and mold. The boards creaked under their combined weight. Dalton tested the knob. Locked. Lila eyed the window. Could be squatters. Not likely. Dalton gave the door a shove. Rust groaned in hinges. Then the lock splintered with a crack. The smell that hit them wasn't just must. It was stale, sour, like old cloth sealed too long. Riker pushed past him inside, nails clicking against warped floorboards. His nose swept the dusty air, his whole body quivering with urgency. Then he stopped, dead center of the living room, staring at the ground. His chest heaved, and he let out a howl so raw it cut through Dalton's ribs. "Jesus Christ," Lila whispered. "I've never heard him." "Neither have I." Dalton knelt, running a hand over floor. The boards were uneven, warped. One plank, just beneath Riker's paw, shifted when Dalton pressed his weight. "Loose," Dalton muttered. Lila drew her flashlight. Its beam skated across the walls. Wallpaper peeling in strips, a collapsed armchair draped with mildew, a family portrait half buried under dust. Smiling faces blurred by time. A mother, a father, 2 children. "This place gives me the creeps," she said. Why is he reacting now? It's been empty for her. 7 years, Dalton said flatly, since the Beckett family vanished. Lila turned sharply. "You never told me this was their house. You never asked." Riker pawed again at the floorboard. His claws scratched until Dalton caught his collar. The dog's eyes shone wet in the beam of the flashlight. "All right," Dalton said softly. "We'll see." He reached for the crowbar he brought out of habit. One didn't enter the hollow place without tools. Wedging the steel beneath the loose plank, he pried upward. The wood shrieked. Dust plumed. Beneath the floorboard gaped darkness. Lila angled the light. For a moment it showed only earth. Then something pale, angular. She sucked in a breath. Bone. Dalton's grip tightened on the crowbar. Not just one bone. The light caught more. A whole lattice of them, jagged and interlocked, buried shallow beneath the soil. Riker backed up, whined, then pressed his head against Dalton's knee, as though seeking comfort or giving it. Call the coroner, Dalton said, his voice gravel. Dalton, Lila's throat worked. That's a whole skeleton. Dalton's eyes never left the hollow. That's not one skeleton. That's several. The next morning, Briar Hollow woke under fog. Word traveled faster than the mist curling off the river. Bones had been found at the old Beckett place. Sheriff Ward had unearthed them himself. People gathered outside the taped-off perimeter. Farmers, gas station clerks, waitresses from Ruby's diner. Whispering, speculating. Dalton ignored them all. His focus was on Dr. Meredith Keene, the county coroner, crouched by the open cavity in the floor. She adjusted her glasses, her latex gloves white against the soil. Multiple remains, she said quietly. Male, female, possibly children. Condition suggests at least a decade old. Maybe more. Dalton's jaw flexed. 7 years since the Becketts disappeared. Meredith's gaze flicked to him, sharp. You think this is them? I think Riker thinks so, Dalton murmured. The dog sat a few feet away, silent now, but his eyes tracked every movement, every lifted bone. Lila crouched beside Dalton. Her breath steamed in the cold. So what now? Dig deeper? We dig, Dalton said. We dig until we know. By dusk, the pit beneath the hollow place was wide enough to swallow the living room. Lanterns buzzed. The team worked in silence, broken only by the scrape of shovels. They uncovered skulls, ribs, tiny bones that twisted the stomach. Lila stood frozen at the sight. Dear God! Dalton didn't speak. His face was carved from stone, but inside, something coiled tighter with each discovery. Because he knew what everyone else refused to say aloud. This wasn't the Beckett family. The number of bones was too high, too varied. This was more than a family of 4. This was something else entirely. Riker growled low at the edge of the pit. His hackles rose, eyes fixed not on the bones, but on the far wall. Dalton followed his gaze. The wallpaper sagged there, damp and torn. A faint outline beneath it caught the lantern light. Rectangular, too perfect to be natural. A door. Hidden. Dalton's blood ran cold. Lila, he said, voice low, give me the axe. The axe bit deep into the wall. Splinters spat across the warped floor, the sound of each strike echoing like a gunshot in the hollow house. Dalton's shoulders burned with the effort, but he kept swinging, focused, relentless. Riker barked once, sharp and insistent, as though urging him on. Behind him, Lila muttered, Sheriff, maybe we should wait for a full crew. We don't know what's behind there. Dalton didn't stop. We can't wait. Not after what we found. With a final swing, the axe head punched through damp plaster and rotten studs. A ragged hole yawned open, exhaling a rush of air that smelled like earth and iron. The lantern light caught the edges of a frame hidden flush against the wall. Dalton shoved, and with a groan the false panel gave way. The hidden door swung inward. Silence swallowed the room. Beyond lay a narrow staircase, vanishing down into darkness. Riker whined, his body trembling against Dalton's leg. Basement, Lila whispered. Didn't know this place had one. Dalton's voice was rough. Nobody did. The steps moaned beneath their weight as they descended. The smell grew stronger. Damp stone mold, and something metallic that made Dalton's stomach turn. His flashlight beam jittered over walls lined with rough-cut stone, then froze on something that made his throat close. Hooks, rusted bent but unmistakable, bolted into the wall at shoulder height. Lila stopped short. Oh my God! Beneath the hooks were stains. Dark, long-dried, but still vivid in the pale light. Dalton forced himself forward, jaw locked tight. His boot nudged something half buried in dirt. He crouched and brushed it off metal. A chain, links corroded with rust. Riker pressed close to his side, a low growl vibrating in his chest. This wasn't just a basement, Dalton said hoarsely. This was a holding place. Lila's voice shook. For who? Dalton didn't answer. His light swept further into the room, onto a crude wooden table, scarred with cuts. On it lay a child's shoe, caked in dust. Lila's breath hitched. She turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. Dalton stared at the shoe for a long moment, then forced himself to move on. At the far end of the basement, the wall looked wrong. A section of stone was newer, sealed with cement that didn't match the rest. He tapped it with the axe handle. Hollow. Riker barked sharply, for bristling. Dalton, Lila whispered, don't. But Dalton was already swinging. The wall cracked, flaked, and then collapsed inward, revealing a cavity barely large enough for a grown man to crawl through. The smell hit them in a wave, rot buried deep. Dalton gagged, pulled his shirt over his nose, and pushed the beam inside. Bodies, stacked like cordwood, skeletal remains tangled together, scraps of cloth clinging to them. The cavity stretched further than the light could reach, as though it tunneled into the earth. Lila staggered back. Dear God, how many? Dalton's face was pale, his eyes hard. Too many. News spread faster than fire. By morning, Briar Hollow was a hive of whispers and panic. At Ruby's diner, farmers huddled over black coffee, voices low. They found a whole room of bones. Sheriff's keeping it quiet, but word is it's dozens. Beckett family? Or someone else? No one knows. That's the worst part. By noon, the FBI was on site, suits and evidence teams swarming the hollow place. The house looked like an open wound beneath the gray sky, its secrets finally bleeding out. Dalton stood outside, coffee gone cold in his hand, watching strangers pick apart the home like vultures. He hated the intrusion, but knew it was necessary. He had no choice now. This was bigger than county jurisdiction. Lila approached, her face drawn from lack of sleep. They want statements. Timelines. Everything you know about the Becketts. Dalton didn't look at her. Everything I know fits in one file. Family disappeared, no signs of struggle, no bodies. Case went cold. But now we got too many bodies. His eyes were distant, shadowed. Lila hesitated, then lowered her voice. Dalton, is there something you're not telling me? His jaw tightened. He drained the bitter coffee, tossed the cup, and walked away. That night, Dalton sat alone in his office. The rain had stopped, but the silence outside felt heavier than any storm. The evidence board loomed in front of him, yellowed photos of the Beckett family, smiling from behind glass. He lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years, and stared at those faces. Margaret Beckett, the mother, known for baking pies for church events. Her husband, Henry, who fixed tractors in his barn. Their two children, Sammy, 8, and Rose, 5. Perfect, ordinary, gone. But Dalton remembered something the reports never mentioned. Something he never wrote down. The night they disappeared, he'd been at their house. He told the deputies he went to check on a noise complaint. That part was true. But what he hadn't said, what he'd buried all these years, was what he saw when Henry Beckett opened the door. A man inside in the shadows. Not a family friend. Not a neighbor. Someone Dalton didn't recognize. A face that vanished before he could place it. He'd let it go, told himself it wasn't his business, that the Becketts were fine. And 2 weeks later, they were gone. Dalton ground the cigarette into the ashtray, his hand trembling. The door creaked open. Lila stepped inside. You're still here. Dalton didn't turn. So are you? I couldn't sleep. She hesitated, then moved closer. Listen. The Bureau's going to dig everything out. They're talking about tying this to other disappearances across the state. Serial level stuff. Dalton finally faced her. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice low. And you think it all started here. I don't know what to think. Her gaze searched his. But you do. I can see it on your face. What aren't you telling me, Sheriff? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. The words stuck like barbed wire in his throat. Before he could answer, Riker, lying near the desk, let out a sudden growl. His ears pricked, body tense. Dalton frowned. What is it, boy? The dog rose, pacing toward the door. He stopped, staring at it, muscles coiled, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Lila moved closer, hand on her holster. Someone outside? Dalton listened. The night was quiet, but his gut told him the dog wasn't wrong. He grabbed his shotgun from the rack. "Stay here." But when he opened the door, the hallway was empty. Only the ticking of the clock echoed in the stillness. Riker pressed past him, nose low to the ground. He padded down the hall, sniffed, then stopped at the back door of the station. Dalton's breath caught. Scratched into the paint, fresh and jagged, were 3 words. "You left them." The next day, FBI agents questioned Dalton for hours. Where had he been 7 years ago? Why did his dog react so violently at the hollow place? Why hadn't he pushed harder on the Beckett disappearance? Dalton kept his answers clipped, factual. But inside, each question twisted the knife of guilt deeper. When they finally left him alone, Lila closed the door behind him and leaned against it, arms folded. "They're looking at you," she said quietly. Dalton met her gaze. "Let them. Don't play stubborn with me. If there's something, anything, you need to say it. Because right now, you're looking less like the sheriff and more like a suspect." His eyes narrowed. "You think I had something to do with this?" "I think you're hiding something." Her voice cracked slightly. "And if you don't trust me enough to tell me, then maybe I picked the wrong badge to serve under." Dalton stared at her, the silence heavy between them. Finally, he said, "Trust works both ways, Deputy." Lila's face tightened. She shook her head and walked out, the slam of the door rattling the glass. Dalton sat there, alone again. Riker climbed onto the couch beside him, pressing his head into Dalton's chest. The sheriff wrapped an arm around the dog's neck, eyes burning. "You know, don't you?" he whispered. "You know what I did." Riker whimpered, the sound soft, almost human. 2 nights later, the hollow place burned. The fire started just before midnight, flames swallowing the rotted structure in a roar that lit the trees orange. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the house was already collapsing in on itself. Dalton stood in the wet grass, sirens wailing around him, the heat of the blaze searing his face. He couldn't look away. Lila rushed to his side, breathless. "They're saying it was arson. Someone wanted the evidence gone." Dalton didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the collapsing roof, sparks spraying into the night. Because deep in his gut, he knew the truth. Whoever had scratched those words on his station door, whoever had buried those bodies, was still out there. And they weren't finished yet. The hollow place smoldered for days. By the time the FBI team sifted through the wreckage, little remained but warped nails and blackened stone. Most of the evidence, whatever secrets the walls had held, was gone, but the bones unearthed beneath the floorboards remained, carefully bagged and cataloged, enough to rattle Briar Hollow to its core. The townsfolk wanted answers. They wanted a monster to blame. And in hushed voices at the diner or over barbed wire fences, more and more of them said the same thing. Maybe the monster was Sheriff Dalton Ward himself. Dalton felt in the way eyes followed him. Conversations hushed as he passed. He carried himself straighter, but inside he was fraying. Sleep came in fits. When it did, the same dream clawed through him. Riker sitting at that blue door, eyes wet, mourning something Dalton couldn't yet face. Deputy Lila Grant kept her distance. She did her job, crisp and precise, but her voice was cool, her gaze wary. Dalton could see the question burning behind her eyes every time they crossed paths. "What are you telling me?" One evening, he found her at the station, staring at the crime board. The Beckett smiled from their photographs, ghosts framed in fading Polaroid. "You ever think," she murmured, "that maybe they weren't victims? Maybe they were part of it?" Dalton stiffened. "Careful with that. I'm serious. We got dozens of bones. That's not just one family secret. That's something bigger. Maybe the Becketts weren't as perfect as they looked." Dalton swallowed hard. He remembered Henry Beckett's face the last time he saw it, eyes darting to that man in the shadows. A face he hadn't forgotten, though he'd tried. "You might not be wrong," he admitted. Lila turned to him. "Then why are you acting like you know more than you're saying?" Dalton's silence was answer enough. Her expression hardened. "You keep shutting me out. One day that's going to cost you." And she walked out, leaving him with the ghosts. The break came 3 nights later. A call from dispatch. A trespasser at the edge of the burned-out hollow place. A figure spotted near the tree line. Dalton and Lila arrived within minutes, headlights cutting through mist. Riker leapt from the truck, nose to the ground, pulling them toward the ruins. Their movement, a man, hunched and gaunt, slipping between the trees. "Stop!" Dalton shouted, shotgun raised. The man froze, then bolted deeper into the woods. Riker launched after him, a streak of muscle and fury. Dalton and Lila crashed through the brush behind, branches clawing their faces, mud sucking at their boots. The man stumbled into a clearing, tripped on a root, and fell hard. By the time he scrambled up, Riker was on him, teeth bared in a snarl that froze him where he crouched. Dalton closed in, breath ragged. The man's face came into focus under the flashlight beam. Hollow cheeks, yellowed eyes, grime caked into every crease. But Dalton knew him. He hadn't seen that face in 7 years, but he knew it. The stranger in the Beckett house. Dalton's world tilted. "You!" he rasped. The man's lips cracked into a grin. "Sheriff Ward, you finally came back." Lila's gun was trained steady. "Who the hell are you?" The man laughed, low and broken. "Name doesn't matter. What matters is you left me there. Left them there. And now look at you, still wearing that badge like you've earned it." Dalton's chest tightened. "The Becketts, what did you do to them?" The man's grin widened. "Wrong question." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Ask what they did with me." At the station, under harsh light, the man sat shackled, still grinning through cracked lips. He gave his name as Joseph Merrick, a drifter, a nobody, but his story wasn't nothing. He said the Becketts weren't victims at all. They were hosts, lured people in, travelers who'd never be missed, kept them in that basement, used them until they were done. Joseph claimed he was one of their captives. Said he survived by chance when fire swept through the house years ago, before the Becketts vanished. He'd hidden in the woods since, half mad, watching. "They weren't saints," Joseph hissed. "They fed on the weak, on the forgotten. And you," he stabbed a finger at Dalton, "you knew something was wrong, but you walked away." Dalton slammed his fist against the table. "You expect me to believe you? That sweet little Rose Beckett was part of that." Joseph only smiled. "Children grow up in cages. They learn to live like animals. You should have heard her laugh when the screaming started." Lila flinched, disgust flickering across her face. Dalton felt bile rise in his throat, but part of him, deep hidden, feared Joseph wasn't lying, because he remembered that night, the shadow in the hall, the way Henry Beckett's eyes had pleaded, not with fear, but with warning. Over the next week, the FBI tried to verify Joseph's story. Records were thin. The Becketts had no known ties to crime, no arrests, no debts. But the number of bones suggested years of disappearances. Some matched missing persons from neighboring counties. Others, no record at all. And yet Joseph remained slippery, half-truths wrapped in riddles. Sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping, sometimes staring at Dalton with something like pity. "You could have stopped them," he whispered one night when Dalton passed his cell. "All you had to do was look inside. But you turned away." Dalton stopped, gripping the bars until his knuckles burned. "Why didn't you run? Why stay here all these years?" Joseph's eyes glinted in the dim light. "Because someone had to remember. And because I wanted you to see." It was Lila who found the final piece. She came into Dalton's office late one evening, a folder in her hand, her face pale. "We've got something." Inside the folder, a photograph, water-damaged but intact, pulled from the ruins of the hollow place. It showed the Becketts, but not like the smiling portrait on Dalton's board. This photo was in the basement, chains visible on the wall behind them. Henry stood with his hands on Sammy's shoulders. Margaret's face was tired, hollow-eyed. Rose's smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. Dalton stared at it, stomach twisting. The perfect family, captured in their true setting. Lila's voice was quiet. "Joseph's not lying." Dalton's chest felt heavy, breath hard to draw. "Then every damn person in this town has been mourning devils." "Not just mourning." Lila's eyes met his. They'd been protecting them, covering it up, maybe not knowing the details, but Turning a blind eye. Same as you. The words cut deep. 2 nights later, Joseph Merrick was found dead in his cell. No sign of forced entry. The cameras failed at the exact hour. Hanging, they said. Suicide. But Dalton didn't believe it. He stood over the body, fists trembling, as Lila whispered. Someone wanted him silenced. Dalton looked at her, weary and broken, and now the truth dies with him. The town buried the story in whispers. The FBI left, their evidence inconclusive, the fire too convenient. The Becketts remained saints in the public eye, a tragedy unsolved. But Dalton knew, Lila knew, and Riker knew most of all. His eyes still haunted when they passed the ruins. One evening, Dalton drove out alone. The hollow place was only ashes now, weeds curling through the char. He sat on the hood of his truck, Riker pressed against his side, watching the sun bleed out over the horizon. Lila arrived, her cruiser crunching gravel. She stepped out, no words at first, just standing beside him, watching the land. Finally, she said, "You can't carry it all." Dalton's voice was low. "I already have. 7 years. And it's still not enough." She looked at him, her face softer now. "Then let me carry some of it." He met her eyes. For the first time in weeks, he didn't see suspicion there. Only weary understanding. The silence stretched between them. Heavy but not hostile. The kind of silence that admits wounds without needing to name them. Dalton laid a hand on Riker's head, feeling the dog's steady warmth. The animal leaned into him, eyes fixed on the ruins, as if mourning not just what was lost, but what was never meant to be found. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the smell of earth and smoke. And in that quiet, as the sun slipped away, Dalton let out the breath he'd been holding for 7 years.